Welcome to Block 6 of our Celebrating the States Block of the Month, the Colorado block. This block uses 3 fabrics, a background, a dark, and a medium. From a 6.5-inch strip of dark fabric, cut 8 rectangles that measure 3.5 by 6.5. I picked my favorite blue for the dark in this block. From a 3.5-inch strip of a medium fabric, cut 4 squares that measure 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. Using red for my medium fabric seemed like the ideal choice. From a 3.5-inch strip of a white fabric that's at least 42 inches long, cut 12 squares that measure 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. On the wrong side of all the squares, you need to draw a line from corner to corner to provide a line for you to sew on. Or, if you don't want to draw lines and you have it available, you can use the diagonal seam tape to help you sew. Place a background square on one end of the rectangle with right sides together. Sew on the line. Make 8. You will use all of the rectangles. Make sure you sew them exactly the way I'm showing in the video and that they all look the same as you send them through the sewing machine. When you get done sewing these seams, you can trim the seam to 1/4 inch and throw away the excess fabric, or you can sew another line a 1/2 inch away from the seam you just sewed and cut in between the 2 seams to get a spare half square triangle unit to use in another project. I like using this method for better accuracy and to get the spare squares. For this extra line, you can either draw it with a pencil, just like you drew the first line if that's the method you used, or you can just eyeball it. Once you're done sewing the second seam, you can either take it over to your rotary cutter and mat and cut them apart with the ruler, or you can just use a scissor and cut in between the 2 lines. Just make sure that you're only picking up 1 rectangle at a time when you're cutting. Now it's time to press. You will need to press 4 of these units towards the triangle and 4 of the units towards the rectangle. I turn mine over and look at them from the back when I'm finished to make sure that I have 4 that are pressed towards the triangle and 4 that are pressed towards the rectangle. Take the time to press your spare squares too. Head over to your sewing machine and match the 4 background squares to the units that are pressed towards the triangle and the 4 medium squares to the units that are pressed towards the rectangle. Using the same method that we started with, make 4 flying geese units with the background squares and the rectangle units. Make sure all your units look the same as you send them through the sewing machine. If you're enjoying our video, we sure hope that you will hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the blocks in our Celebrating the States series. If you have sewn the second seam, make sure that before you cut them apart, you double check that you've made the right unit, and that way if you haven't, you still have a chance to take the stitches out and sew it correctly. With the right sides together, place the medium square on the other end of the rectangle unit. This time we are sewing corner to corner in the same direction as the first line. When you get done sewing, make sure to open it up right away and double check that you've sewn the line in the correct direction. Once you've double checked, you can go ahead and sew that extra seam to get your spare squares. Now it's time to head back to the ironing board and press. For the flying geese units, you are going to press towards the triangle. For the other rectangle units, you are going to press towards the triangle. If you look at these rectangle units from the back side, both of the seams should be going the same direction. Before you head to the sewing machine to sew these units together, take some time to press your spare squares. When sewing the rectangle units together, there is only one seam that will have to match to anything else, and if pressed correctly, it should be nesting together quite nicely. Make sure you're using 1/4 inch seam allowances. Make sure you press these units all the same. Press towards the flying geese units. Once back at your sewing machine, you want to turn 2 of the blocks a 1/4 turn and then sew them together to make 2 half blocks. These seams should nest together and you won't have any trouble sewing over them. Press both of the half blocks the same way. That way, when you turn one to sew it to the other, your seams will nest together. One more seam and you're done. This block will measure 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches, and then it will measure 12 inches by 12 inches when sewn into the quilt top. If this is the first block you're seeing in our Celebrating the States series, look in the description below for a link to the playlist containing the first 5 videos. Now that your block is done, make sure that you press those spare squares, and I also took the time to trim them all to 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches so they're ready to go for a future project. We hope that you remembered to hit that like button, that you've made a comment about our block, that you're sharing this with a quilting friend, but most importantly, subscribing so that you don't miss any of the blocks in our Celebrating the States series. Thanks for watching and happy quilting!